It's certainly being discussed as something which is going to cause problems for Trump. And the last thing you need in a delicate, difficult international relationship, situation like this is anyone being driven by anything other than what's in the best interests of international relations rather than domestic politicking. So I'm nervous about it.
Let's speak to both of you then about what you make of this decision by Joe Biden. Claire Fox, over to you. We know that Donald Trump's policy is going to be very different to Joe Biden. What is Joe Biden up to here?
Don't know, but I suppose it's nerve-wracking because this is a very major escalation of the conflict. I've at no point had any doubts about the righteousness of Ukraine's war and have indeed wanted greater support from the West for Ukraine. But there's something nerve-wracking about what's just happened because in some ways it's happened out of the blue. It's certainly a gear shift in the way that the West will be perceived to be involved in this. And I think the problem is that, as you hinted at, Kate, at the beginning, rather than believing that this is something which is being, really thought through, part of a very important realpolitik, part of a really thought through plan, it does feel a little bit as though it's driven by domestic realities. And it's certainly being discussed as something which is going to cause problems for Trump. And the last thing you need in a delicate, difficult international relationship, situation like this is anyone being driven by anything other than what's in the best interests of international relations rather than domestic politicking. So I'm nervous about it. It's also the case that in the Times article on, detailing this, it explains that these particular missiles are ultimately, it's not just a question of giving Ukraine more weaponry. These are particular missiles that need to be operated by American forces effectively. So it's not just like handing them over and saying, get on with it. So it really does drag America into a much closer situation and an unstable, destabilizing situation. And I fear that rather than it helping, it might be a real problem.
Is there any part of Donald Trump that you think wants this news, Alison?
Well, I do think that's quite an interesting thing, actually, in that although on the face of it, this would appear that Biden's thinking, right, I've got slightly less than 2 months to do everything that I want to do before I'm no longer president. And that there is the sense that it could cause greater problems for Donald Trump. There is also part of me that wonders, actually, is this an opportunity for him then to be able to sweep into power in January and then lay out his new plan? There's been some talk already about sort of a demilitarized zone that might go between the Russian troops there and the Ukrainian troops. And so really for him, again, domestically, which isn't how we should be thinking about it, but domestically, there is the opportunity for him to come into this looking like he has de-escalated what is currently a situation which appears to be escalating with this move. But I mean, this has been brewing for a long time. And when Keir Starmer went to the States earlier in the year, he was pressing Biden at that point to try and allow these weapons to be sent and for Britain to use our longer range weapons out there as well. But Biden, throughout all this, has been incredibly cautious. And you could say, OK, that's a good thing because it's prevented, up until this point, the war escalating with Russia doing something even more drastic. But the counter argument to that is the Russians have had time to retake a lot of that ground that the Ukrainians took in the summer. They are still in a reasonably strong position. They currently appear to be a little bit on the offensive. And so actually, if Biden had put more support in quicker, the Russians may have been in a far weaker position. Plus, they've now got the North Koreans helping them as well, which I think is what's finally tipped the balance.
I say that about Trump, Claire, because there is a theory that actually if Putin does feel compromised by Ukraine being able to use US long-range missiles, that actually he'll be ready to come to the negotiating table with Donald Trump after January, with potentially able to make a few more concessions, that actually this could suit Donald Trump very well indeed if Putin is weakened by this? Has there been any collusion at all? Or, judging by the response of some of those connected to him and his son, Donald Trump Jr., everyone's mentioning World War III and how dangerous a move this is because it could escalate and cause Putin to, go ballistic, basically. What do you make of that? What do you make of any collusion at all between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, or is that just out of the question?
I think it's highly unlikely, but whether Trump can take advantage of it or not, I mean, escalation of war in a situation like this is not a question of, Biden and Trump sitting around having a chat saying, should we escalate or de-escalate? I mean, to a certain extent, you can lose control of situations like that. That's the fear. And, you on Times Radio had on a very aggressive Russian guest this morning who made the point nobody wanted the First World War, but it still happened. So, we don't want to be too glib about this and just think it's all to do with maneuverings. But I really agree with what we just said, actually, that, my argument is more that I wish that the West had given much better and more comprehensive support to Ukraine up until now. In some ways, it's dragged on, right? Between America being rather slow, yes, supporting, but not fully going in. Europe being split on the question of what they should do in Ukraine, that now it's become this slow attrition. And so it's more a question of the timing, which is why now. It might well have been a long time coming, but it's like, why is it taking so long? Why is it happening now? And it is obviously goes against, whether we like it or not, the kind of mood music, the kind of policies that Trump argued for and won convincingly in an election. So it does seem to me to be an attempt at usurping, as it were, Trump's wishes. I'm not interested in what, I'm just saying what he argued for, Trump, was a different course of events. And Biden is saying, well, you might have argued that, but I'm still in. I'm going to do this.
Should Joe Biden, just very briefly, each of you or one of you, should Joe Biden authorise the use of Storm Shadow long-range missiles donated by Britain? They use US technology, so it would need some sort of sign-off from Joe Biden. Harry Cole of The Sun earlier just saying, as far as we're at today, Joe Biden hasn't done that, won't do that. Should the UK stay out of this, or is that just a natural follow-on, Alison?
I think it is now a natural follow-on. I mean, when Starmer went to see Biden earlier in the year, that was to ask this question, whether we could do this. And I think we have to keep standing firm with Ukraine. You only have to look at what they're saying in Poland, which is they are utterly terrified at the prospect that Ukraine may completely fall, and that really endangers their security. We've come this far, and every step of the way we've been slow to give Ukraine what it requires. But I think at this point it is now the time to do this.
All right, thank you both of you. When we come back, we're going to discuss beekeeping and pub quizzes. Seemingly inoffensive activities that are being restricted by councils, criminalising, in some cases, inoffensive activities. It all sounds a bit extraordinary. It's a story in the Times. We'll seek the opinion of Baroness Fox, Claire Fox and Alison Phillips in just a minute.